All right, it's official. Dark Phoenix has come out and it is bombed. And now that that is over with, Fox is officially done with the X-Men. The only other thing that they have coming out is New Mutants, and who the hell knows when we're going to see that movie, if we're going to see that movie. So as of now, it's safe to say Fox is officially done with the X-Men. And now that Disney has bought them, and that Endgame has come out and made $1 billion and has ended the Infinity Saga phase, everybody's wondering and knowing that the X-Men are going to be incorporated into the MCU, but we don't know how and we don't know when. Kevin Feige has stated that it'll be a while before we see the X-Men incorporated into the overarching Marvel Cinematic Universe, as they're currently trying to figure out where they're going to take this franchise next, which is a good idea. Well, I have a suggestion. Seeing as how Disney is about to launch their streaming service in November, they're currently stacking the deck with as much content as they can to get people interested. They have a High School Musical show coming out. They have four other Marvel shows: WandaVision, uh, um, Falcon and Bucky, a bunch of other shows. They have a show taking inspiration from the Marvel Comics What If, which is basically exploring the um, uh, what things could have happened if they didn't play out a certain way. They have a Kid Loki show coming out. Well, if Disney is in fact throwing as much stuff into the streaming service as they're doing, they're doing a Lady and the Tramp movie, because who the hell wants that? I think that it would be in their best interest to put the X-Men on a streaming show. And I'm not talking about an animated show. I'm talking about doing a live action X-Men TV show. Um, in the vein of something like Westworld. And when I say that, I mean give it the budget and the scale and the scope of something like Westworld, or something like, Game of Thrones, if we want to get really, really heavy. But I think that if you give the X-Men show a budget of something like Westworld, you can do some pretty cool stuff. Now, it's being said that the Star Wars show that Jon Favreau is spearheading will have an overarching budget. In their first season, it's going to have an overarching budget of $100 million, and they have 10 episodes planned. Each episode is going to have a budget of around $10 million. So that's about as much budget as, say, Jordan Peele's Us had. So if you give a budget like that on a TV scale, that's a lot of money. Now, we've seen what special effects can be like on TV from stuff like Legion, or from stuff like Game of Thrones, um, uh, or even going as far back as like the early 2000s with stuff like Lost. These are shows that had big budgets, and for the most part, the special effects and action choreography were seamless. So my take on how to do an X-Men show is if you do something like Freaks and Geeks meets Mission Impossible. Now I know a bunch of you are going, how the hell is that going to work? Freaks and Geeks meets Mission Impossible. That doesn't make any fucking sense. Well, let me get down to the reasons why this could potentially work out for everybody. Number one, by making it on the streaming service, this removes the sense of obligation that we have as audience goers to see it in the theater. Think about it. Whenever you see a trailer for an X-Men show, don't you kind of roll your, or for an X-Men movie, for that matter, don't you kind of roll your eyes every time you see a trailer for an X-Men movie? I know I do. I'm like, really? We're doing another X-Men movie? Didn't we just have the last one? The last one wasn't even all that good. I can count on one hand, not even one hand. I could count on maybe four fingers the good X-Men movies that we've had in the past 20 years. Hint, there's not that many. But by putting it on the streaming service, this makes people's uh, interest peaked in the streaming service. So not only are you giving them Star Wars and High School Musical, and not only are you giving them other Marvel shows about their side characters, now you have what is arguably Marvel's most bankable and most recognizable property going to your streaming service. That is guaranteed to get people interested in your streaming service. Uh, a second point is that it gives these showrunners the chance to fully flesh out these complex and highly dense storylines. Trying to adapt the Phoenix Saga into a 2-hour movie was a mistake. Anybody who has ever read that that run knows just how dense and how big and how huge that storyline is. That storyline is on a cosmic scale. That storyline lasted from the mid 70s to the to the early 80s. That's how much of a time it took for Chris for Chris Claremont to fully flesh out that story. So I think if they put it on the streaming service, now that gives you time to fully flesh out these stories, fully flesh out Age of Apocalypse, fully flesh out the Sentinel saga, fully flesh out the Dark Phoenix saga. Give these storylines the amount of time they need to breathe. These the way that they tackle these storylines in these X-Men movies are so it feels like it, it it feels like those YouTube videos that try to cram the history of a certain thing all into like 12 minutes when you know that they're leaving out really important bits, but they can't get to it because they're trying to conserve time. That's what it feels like. Every time I walk in, when I walked out of Dark Phoenix, it felt like they had only scratched the surface, and they really did only scratch the surface on what that story is. There's a whole other bit to that story that they didn't even get to. This way, they can develop it over a one season arc and really devote to it. A third thing is by stretching out these stories, we can finally get invested in these characters. A big problem with these X Men movies is that I don't give a fuck about anybody. I don't give a fuck about Jean Grey. And when she goes bad, I'm like, well, okay, but I don't know her as a character. And they really did put a switch on a dime. All of a sudden, she's killing Mystique, and she's rocking an emo jacket, and she's got scratches on her faces that glow. I don't know what the fuck this is. Why should I care? However, if you were to put it on a streaming service and make a TV show out of it, I can actually get invested in Jean. I can get invested in how she's tortured with this power inside of her that is telling her to do evil things and she has to suppress it. How that affects Scott as they grow closer in their relationship. Jean is giving more and more into her Phoenix dark side. That can be an interesting parallel that they didn't touch upon. They barely even touched that they were a couple. They had like one scene where they were at a party drinking booze, and that was to show, oh yeah, by the way, we're a couple now. When the fuck did that happen? You know what I mean? This way, I can get invested in the character of Cyclops, in his role in slowly becoming the second in command to Charles Xavier, and slowly becoming into basically a pretty badass character in in terms of X-Men. I can get invested in someone like Nightcrawler, who is feels, even amongst people who are like him, feels outcast because he doesn't look like them. He can't pass as a normal human. He's this blue, furry skinned guy. He can't pass as a normal human. So he feels even more ostracized. Now I can get invested in how he feels. In the movies, Nightcrawler's just kind of there. Like in Dark Phoenix, Nightcrawler was just kind of there. He didn't really do a whole lot of stuff. He had like one cool scene in the spaceship. That was it. You, the other times they cut to him, he just looks nervous and scared. That's not Nightcrawler. Nightcrawler has a deep, rich history backstory. This guy is a devout Christian who feels like who even though he feels ostracized, he feels like he was put on this place for a sense of purpose. And if you divulge that, if you let that play out over 12 episodes, I can get invested in it. I can get invested in Kitty Pryde as she becomes this badass. I can get invested in Colossus as he goes from bad guy to to sort of unsure of his place into good guy. I can get invested into Gambit as he goes from this outsider, this loner, into becoming into the X-Men becoming his family and him wanting to fight for the death for them. I could get invested in all that stuff. Also, I think you. I personally like the X-Men when they are teenagers. If any of you are around my age, so in your mid 20s, or if you're just steeped in X-Men lore, you are aware of this show called X-Men Evolution. X-Men Evolution was a show that came out roughly around the same time as the Bryan Singer movies. And X-Men Evolution really focused on these characters being in high school, and that was sort of a parallel for the X-Men gene was primarily supposed to come out during puberty. So if you put this show in high school, now you have a really good chance to really develop these characters and to really provide an entry point. It also is it's also easy marketing because now you can appeal to teenagers who are going in high school or to the 20-year-olds who have just graduated from college and are unsure of their place. Now they have a show, a really cool genre show that not only focuses on what it's like to be a young adult in the world and to find their place, but to also be this living weapon. And that's where my sort of freaks and geeks Mission Impossible comparison comes in because the I think about the show Freaks and Geeks, which is all about Lindsay as a character trying to find her place in the world. So is her brother Sam. They're both trying to find their place in the world, and they both gravitate toward these two different factions. It'd be interesting if you did that in a live action TV show if he showed both the X-Men side and if he showed the Brotherhood of Mutant side and show how these different groups deal with their powers differently. And this provides, context and, a point of entry for kids who don't know where they fit in the world. I don't know, if I'm gay. I don't know if I should be a writer. I don't know if I should be, a, uh, a a nurse. I don't know if I should go to college. I don't know what to do. You know what I mean? And now they have a show that appeals to them. That would be something that would hit home great. With the Mission Impossible comparison, the X Men go on missions. And that's the thing that's missing from these X Men movies. They don't really do anything in these X Men movies. Problems just sort of kind of come up and they address them. The X Men in the comics actively go to fight problems. That first bit in X Men Dark Phoenix, where they go up to space to help the NASA astronauts, that's what the X Men do on an everyday basis. So imagine this. Imagine you have this show, this genre show that's on this Disney streaming service. It tells about these kids in high school who are not only having to deal with the pressures of finding their place in the world, finding their place, finding their career, growing up in these hostile environments. Not only that, but one of them can shoot lasers out of their eyes whenever they get scared or anxious. Well, uh, there's another one who can read your thoughts and who can know what you're thinking on a dime at any time. On top of that, they live at this boarding school where when they're not in school trying to find their place in the world, they're out fighting giant monsters and cults and they're fighting cosmic beings. That's a really interesting show, and you could do it in something in the vein of something like, say, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which also touched upon that. That could be a really interesting thing. My final point is that obviously there comes a point of who gets to take over this show, who's going to run this show, who's going to put this show, who's going to put together this show. Well, I have a solution, and it seems pretty obvious to me. You get the create, you get the people who developed the '90s X-Men TV show. These are the people who really understand what it's like what these characters go through, and they really had a handle on these complex X-Men stories. The X-Men is basically a soap opera anyway, so you putting it on a TV show allows you to dig deep in that drama and really get a sense on what's going on, and you get to go inside these characters' heads, and you get to really figure out who these characters are, and you can tackle these big story issues. You could have the first the first season could be God Loves Man Kills, where in this storyline, which was loosely adapted into X-Men 2, this guy is kidnapping various mutants and experimenting on them, trying to figure out where the X gene coming from, how we can negate it and stuff like that. It'd be really interesting if the first season of the show he's going around stealing and kidnapping kids and experimenting on kids and Cyclops and Jean and Nightcrawler and Kitty in their high school, various kids are missing, and in their town various kids are missing, and they have to figure out why, Professor X realizes that all these kids are mutants, and so they go in, and it gives these characters a realization that people on the outside really fucking hate them. There are people that are after them. There are people that are trying to kill them, and it gives precedence to someone like Magneto, who has been preaching this since day one. And now these characters and now these teenagers, that really instills in them that I have to figure out what side of the fence I'm going to be on. I think that would provide a really interesting dichotomy into what we've been seeing in these X-Men movies, which has been just the same thing over and over and over and over again. I think if Marvel and Disney were to do this, this would be a great way for them to really to really capitalize on this brand that they haven't been capitalizing since probably the first X-Men movie. This has been a brand that has just been chugging along, but I think that if they put it on the streaming service, they have a better chance at getting the best quality from this franchise and really getting the most out of this property. So that's my take on where the Disney and Marvel should bring the X-Men franchise. If you like what I heard here, and you want to hear more on my thoughts on various things, not just Marvel, but all things entertainment related, please subscribe to my channel. And if you care to give it a like, give a like. But I'm not going to force your hand.